Okay, can you turn forward? Is that uncomfortable for you?
I'm
But no,
okay
no,
either
I
way.
mean like this way.
To you?
If you can, to both me and the commissioners.
Is this okay?
Just make sure you don't fall backwards.
I will.
please.
Thank you.
You comfortable?
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
I want you to have a look at the document which has whether
This.
I'm asking that this be admitted as AG1.
Yes, the document is submitted as AG.
And I have 3 copies for the commissioners. Just Okay, I'm just going to ask that the glass and the bottle of water be removed and fresh ones put to the glass. So could you tell us what are your qualifications?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Engineering, and I also have Master's of Science in Project Management.
Could you pull the microphone a little more towards you?
Is it better?
Yes, and how long have you worked in the information technology field?
For approximately 13 years.
And your current position at GCOM is what?
Information Technology Manager.
And what are you responsible for at GCOM?
Well, at GCOM, I am in charge of the Information Technology Division that has many responsibilities. Registration of eligible Guyanese, as well as election-related projects.
At GCOM, are you also a member of the senior management team?
Correct.
And who leads that team? Which official?
This Chief Election Officer.
And are you also a member of the operations department?
That's correct.
And who leads that team?
The Deputy Chief Election Officer.
Now, what is the operations department responsible for?
It is responsible for all things operational, activities, planning and conduct and implementation of activities related to registration as well as elections.
Okay. Now, I am going to ask that you be shown a copy of your statement. Right. And I want you to look at paragraph 4.
Sure.
Is it correct to say that your key responsibilities are set out in paragraph 4 of your statement? Thank you. And I want you to look at paragraph 5. And were you involved in the areas set out in paragraph 5 as you have said in your statement?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any objection to him holding on to it? Sure. Unless you need to refresh your memory,
Sure.
in which case we can have that done. Did you work for the March 2020 elections?
Yes, I did.
Were you involved, and the CEO at that time was who?
Mr. Keith Lowenfield,
And who was the deputy CEO?
Miss Roxanne Myers.
Do you know who was the returning officer for District 4.
Yes, I do.
Who was that?
Mr. Claremont Mingo.
And are you able to tell us what was his substantive post at the time of the March 2020 election?
He substantively held the position of registration officer for the Fort Wellington registration area, and for the 2020 elections, he was appointed returning officer.
Now, in preparing your statement, did you do a list or did you prepare a list of all the returning officers appointed for the general and region?
Did a list
Provided by whom?
provided by the chief election officer.
And if you see that list again, will you be able to identify it?
Yes, I would.
I'm asking that the witness be shown a document which is already entitled AG1. Received from the say chief election officer, you're talking about Mr. Lowenfield.
That's correct.
Might this be admitted and marked AG1A? And I have 3 copies for the commissioners.
AG1.
Yes. Thank you. Now you say you got this from the chief election officer at the time. Can you recall when you received this list from him?
I cannot say exactly when, but it would have been around the time just after their appointment.
Are you familiar with the phrase statement of poll?
Yes, I am.
What is it from your understanding as a GCOM employee?
The statement of poll, or commonly referred to as SOP, is a document, a statutory document, that is prepared by each presiding officer after the close of poll and after they would have counted the votes cast at that polling station.
And would this statement of poll contain information about the polling district,
Yes, it would.
division number,
That's correct?
polling station information,
Yes.
number of votes cast for each party's list of candidates,
Correct.
the number of rejected, spoiled, and destroyed ballot papers,
Correct.
and how many statements of polls is the presiding officer required to produce?
By law, the presiding officer is required to ensure the preparation of statements for the chief election officer, the returning officer. One statement is to be prepared for posting outside of the polling station in a conspicuous place. And each polling agent present at the polling station is also entitled to a copy.
Sure. So, is it then that presiding officers get books of statements of polls for use on election day?
That's correct.
And are the same statements of polls used for the general and the regional
Well,
election?
no. So the polling stations or the presiding officers are provided with two unique books, at least. One for general and one for regional.
Thank you. And after the presiding officer has filled in the information on each of these books, from what you've just said, one copy is sent to the returning officer and one copy is sent to the chief elections officer.
That's correct.
Now, you told us a short while ago, you used the term list of candidates. What's the list of candidates that you refer to?
List of candidates is a list that is submitted on election day to the chief election officer for parties who are desirous of contesting the elections in whatever district or the entire country. And that list of candidates, once approved, becomes the list that is used to place that party on the ballot.
Okay, I don't know if I misheard you. Did you say election day or nomination day?
Sorry, my mistake. That is nomination day. The submission of lists is done on nomination day.
Okay.
So the list contains all candidates for a particular political party.
That's correct. In addition to those who would have nominated those candidates, a list of nominators.
List from the respective parties, does the CEO then cause these persons to receive any sort of accreditation or identification or anything like that?
No. Once approved, the representative of that list is so informed of the list's approval. But candidates or persons on those lists don't usually get any sort of accreditation, meaning a badge.
So, who are election agents? Are they the only ones receiving the badge?
So, election agents are appointed by the representative of the list by way of notice in writing. In this case, a badge. Such person will also have the authority to appoint assistant election agents for the district, counting agents for the district, and polling agents for each polling station. Those persons also receive an accreditation.
Thank you. Now, in terms of local observers, who is responsible for accrediting those persons?
The Guyana Elections Commission.
And what's the process? Do they write to the CEO and then
No.
they get a letter of
they would be provided with an accreditation.
Okay. And how are international observers appointed? Can you say?
International observers are approved for participation in any election by the government of Guyana through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Once the ministry approves their participation, this information is communicated to the chairman of the Elections Commission, who then issues an accreditation in that regard.
Okay. Now, persons who are on the approved list of candidates but who have not received accreditation badges, are they allowed to go to polling stations as
Yes.
candidates?
Yes, candidates are allowed
Now, you said that you participated in the organization process for the March 2020 elections.
Correct.
So, does a returning officer have deputy returning officers appointed?
Yes.
By whom?
The deputy returning officers are appointed by the chief election officer.
And, well, how is it? Is it a percentage? How is it a calculation? How is it
It-
determined?
Thank you. It varies. A returning officer has as many deputy returning officers as is required based on the many factors, namely the size of that district and the number of polling stations. So whatever calculation is done based on the number of polling stations in that district, and of course their proximity to each other and so on, that will have an influence as to the number of deputy returning officers that are required.
Thank you. And tell us what is the responsibility of the returning officer after polls are closed?
Is it the deputy returning officer?
No,
Did
the
you say
returning
the returning
officer.
officer?
Yes.
Well, the returning officer is assigned an office where he or she would await the receipt of his respective package, meaning the package prepared by presiding officers at their respective polling stations. Within those packages are and he is required to use those documents in a further process.
Okay. So the returning officer for District 4 was Mr. Mengo.
Correct.
So Mr. Mengo would have to receive the statements of polls from all the polling stations
Yes.
in that district.
That's correct. Yes.
And does the returning officer, well, would he be doing what each returning officer is doing in the other districts? Would he be doing the same process?
Yes.
And do you refer to that process as ascertainment?
Ascertainment, correct.
What do you mean by that?
Ascertainment is the procedure by which the returning officer adds up all of the votes cast for each party's list of candidates from statements of poll using any tool that is available to him or her.
Now, what I want to ask you is District 4 essentially deals with the area of Georgetown and surrounding areas, correct?
Yes, if I may expand on that.
Yes, please.
So Georgetown is divided for administrative purposes, well, District 4, sorry, is divided for administrative purposes because of its size into 4 what we call sub-districts. That would be the east bank of Demerara, south and north Georgetown, and the east coast of Demerara.
Now, you told us that one set from the polling station, one set of statement of polls will be sent directly to the CEO, and one set will be sent to the returning officer.
No, I didn't say that.
Explain that.
So the presiding officer, after preparation of such statements, will deliver those statements, and I refer to them as 2 packages.
Yes.
One for the RO and one for the CEO. Those packages are delivered to the deputy returning officer, who then has the responsibility to transmit both packages to the returning officer. In turn, the returning officer, of course, will retain his package and will then have to send the CEO's package to the office of the CEO or to the CEO. Sure.
I don't think I got that clearly. Deputy RO forwards the package to the RO.
Correct.
The RO will then forward it to the,
Forward the CEO's package
oh,
to the CEO. He will retain his package.
And the reason he retains this package is because he now has to engage in this ascertainment process.
That's correct.
Is there any reason for the RO to hold on to the CEO's documents?
In my view, no.
Now, just as an aside, can you tell me whether there was any delay in the CEO receiving his documentation from any other district or region in Guyana after the March 2020 elections? Well, apart from District 4.
Apart from District 4?
Yes.
Well, yes, there are always delays because of the geographical sparseness of Guyana. We have many hinterland communities, many hinterland districts. I can recall districts 1, 7, 8, and 9. They are particularly difficult to access. And therefore, returning officers may, yes, hold on to those packages. And when it's convenient or when it's appropriate, based on transportation and the time of day and so on, will transmit. So yes, there is a little delay, but it is because of, the geographical nature of Guyana.
Sure. So just so that we can explain it, if you have a delay from these outlying areas, it's a logistical problem, like a plane doesn't arrive.
That's
that
correct.
Kind of
That's
thing?
correct, yes.
I see. After the process of ascertainment, as you describe it, is finished, does the returning officer have a responsibility?
Yes, he does.
And what is that?
The returning officer is responsible for publicly declaring the result based on that ascertainment. He is also required, he or she is also required to prepare what is known as an election return and forward that document to the chief election officer.
Now, the result which he publicly declares, is it correct to say that this has to be in accordance with the total number of valid votes which have been ascertained?
That's correct, yes.
Is there anything, as far as you know, which allows a returning officer to make a declaration before the total number of valid votes have been ascertained?
No.
Having worked with GCOM for some years, have you ever seen any returning officer declare a result before the total number of valid votes have been ascertained?
I have not.
Now, the election return goes to the CEO. What is a CEO required to do?
The CEO is required to prepare a report. Of course, once he receives all of the election returns, in this case from all 10 electoral districts, and provide that report in manual and electronic form to the chairman and by extension the Commission.
The GCOM Commission is made up of how many members?
The Commission has 7 members, including the chairman.
And after the commission gets this report from the CEO, what occurs?
Well, the Commission would have a discussion about it, and thereafter, once those discussions are favorable, the chairman will then publicly declare the result of the election for the entire country.
And when you say the entire country, you mean for all 10 districts?
That's correct. And she, in this case, would also declare the presidential candidate being the president-elect.
Is the CEO also required to prepare a report about the allocation of seats?
Yes, he is.
For whom?
That also is for the chairman and the commission.
And would this be the seats to the National Assembly as well as for the regional democratic council?
That's correct. So it's 2 reports.
Now, sir, I am going to take you a bit closer to the March 2020 elections. Are you familiar with Ashman's building in District 4?
Yes, I am.
And can you tell us how Ashman's building came to be used for the March 2020 elections?
Well, in the planning stages, GCOM was desirous of finding a location that is suitable, meaning adequate in size for the purposes that they require it for. And to my knowledge, Ashman's was chosen to be that building.
All right. And which offices were going to be housed there for the March 2020 election?
Well, primarily there are offices for the returning officer for district number 4 and the chief election officer. In addition, there are offices allocated to the deputy chief election officer and the commissioners.
Including the chairman?
Including the chairman, yes.
And your staff or your IT department was located where for the March 2020 election?
In the very Ashman's building.
And about how many members of staff did you have in your division to work for this election?
Approximately 41.
Thank you. Had GCOM devised a process whereby this staff would be able to work continuously?
Yes, yes,
Can
we
you
have.
tell us what arrangements had been put in place by GCOM for this to happen?
Well, simply a shift system.
I see.
Yeah,
So the 41 persons in your division were on a shift system.
correct.
And what was the reason for this? Sounds like an obvious question, but
Yes,
could you
because
explain?
we are required to work until the end continuously without stoppages.
When you say the end, what do you mean?
Well, I think I must explain the purpose of what that shift system was set up for.
Sure.
So I was in charge of what is known as the tabulation center, which should be contrasted to be a different process than that of the returning officer.
Yes.
So the tabulation center is responsible for tabulating the chief elections officer's copies of statements of poll with the objective of complying with the requirement for him to submit a digital or an electronic report to the commission. And could you bring me back to the question,
and
the
you
actual
have 41
question?
officers
That's
on,
correct.
on shift
On shift.
to ensure that this could be performed for the chief elections officer.
That is correct, yes.
Good. So, sorry, Commissioner, you had a question.
Just so I don't get lost
Sure.
in the technicality of it, was it the, while the RO was verifying the statements of poll, the tabulation would be going on at the same time?
So,
One had to await the other.
well, I wouldn't say verifying.
Yeah.
The returning officer has his or her process to conduct. That is the ascertainment.
Yes.
And he or she does that by way of his or her statements.
Yes.
Recall I said that the CEO also gets a statement. His statements are in parallel, concomitantly with the other returning officers, being tabulated at the tabulation center.
Yeah.
So the tabulation center, of which I was in command, was treating with statements of poll from not only District 4, but from all across Guyana. Yes.
So I want to go back a little bit. I know we're talking a lot about statements of polls, right? But I want you to explain to me how essentially, how do you determine how many statements of polls, for example, are prepared for the different polling stations?
Based on the number of polling stations, of course, each polling station is required to produce a statement for general and regional. And I think I did explain how many statements
Yes.
based on the number of counting or polling agents present, as well as for the purposes of the RO, the CEO, and one for posting. So there's a schedule produced that determines the number of statements. I think in the case of the 2020 elections, it was decided that each polling station will receive 3 books of quadruplicate, which would be 12 statements each polling station, 12 statements each for general and regional. Did I make that clear enough? So I
So
will.
is it correct to say that each polling
Each polling station,
would receive 3 books?
3 books of statements of poll for general and 3 books for regional. Right. Those books comprise 4 statements. It is a carbonless book whereby when the presiding officer prepares the first page, it is replicated to 3 other pages in that book. Thereby, once they prepare 1, you have 4. And usually, they are required to prepare write up 3 books.
Because of the number of
Correct.
persons present.
Correct. Well, not only present, but the requirements. RO, CEO, posting, those are 3.
And then you have the
The number of agents present. Right. Sometimes they may not have to do a 3rd book, depending on the number of agents present, but that was the maximum.
Okay. Now, can you, I want you to look at paragraph 19 of your statement.
Yes.
And can you tell us how many polling stations there were for District 4? Or in
800.
District 4.
Sorry, yes. In District 4, 879 polling stations for the March 2020 elections.
And in particular, can you tell me how many polling stations were there for East Bank Demerara
192,
and for South Georgetown?
215,
Thank you. Now, when the SOPs arrive for the CEO, okay, so we now in March 2020, we are at Ashman's building. The SOPs are coming in for the CEO.
correct.
How do they arrive? What do they look like when they are brought in?
So they arrive in a sealed envelope, sealed from the presiding officer from the polling station. They arrive at what I refer to as a receipt station, which is, in this case, on this first level of the Ashman's building.
Is there a particular division of GCOM that deals with this?
Yes, it's usually, well, in this case, the logistics division would have personnel assigned to that receipt.
And having received these sealed envelopes from the different regions, what are they required to do?
They're required to unseal the envelope, verify its contents, of course, and then make a log entry where there is some, whoever is delivering it has to sign as it being delivered, and whatever personnel is receiving it will have to sign as receiver.
And what then becomes, what will become of the SOPs?
For 2020 elections, those SOPs were transmitted to the commissioners who were, in this case, in close proximity to that receipt station.
Sure. And would they perform any kind of role in the process?
Yes, the commissioners would review these statements, these SOPs, with the aim of verifying its authenticity.
How would, well, what would they use to do so?
Well, they look for a specific security feature which is known to them.
Okay. Now, this process that you're talking about, I want to make it clear. This is the process for the SOPs coming directly to the CEO, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Once the GCOM commissioners are able to find a specific security feature which you've just spoken about, do they do anything?
Yes, the commissioners would initial, usually at the bottom right-hand corner of the statement, which serves to show that they were certified as being authentic.
And what will become of the SOPs when the commissioners are finished with them?
The SOPs are then moved from or transmitted to the tabulation center.
And that is where you were in charge on that day.
That's correct.
So what was your process for receipt of the SOPs?
So similarly, like the receipt station, staff there would receive and fill out a logbook where someone would sign as delivering and someone would sign as receiving. Thereafter, a process ensues based on that receipt.
And as the information is input into your system, are reports generated?
Yes, reports are generated.
For whom?
Well, the reports, once, these reports are for the tabulation center. However, the DCO, who had oversight of the tabulation center, or my team, would from time to time request those reports.
And can you recall whether for the March 2020 elections, whether the DCO requested such reports?
Yes, she did.
And were those reports provided to her?
Yes, it was.
I want to take you to the 2nd of March 2020, which is Elections Day. After the close of polls, did you take up duty at the tabulation center at Ashman's building?
Yes, I did.
And was this about 7 o'clock in the night?
That's correct.
Well, could you tell me who was there when you went to take up duty?
Well, of course, the staff that was on shift was at the tabulation center. And I also observed several commissioners, namely Commissioners Bibi Shadiq and Vincent Alexander. A little bit after, I remember seeing Madam Chairman, Justice Claudette Singh. She visited my center.
Okay. Are you able to say when the DROs delivered the first SOPs for District 4 to the RO's office at Ashman's building?
I observed delivery during the night of March 2nd, 2020.
And when did you get the first SOP for the CEO from District 4?
In the morning of March the 3rd.
Do you, or is there any, the CEO's SOPs for District 4 had not come at the same time as the ones to the returning officer?
No, I could not, I cannot say.
So let's move on to the 3rd of March 2020. I take it you were still at the tabulation center.
Yes, I was.
A particular ballot box was brought in, correct?
Well, not the ballot box, but
Yeah,
a
it's
statement.
SOP for a ballot box.
That's correct, yes.
And how long did it take for that to be certified at the tabulation center?
Well, the entire process, as I recall, from receipt at the receipt station through to the commissioners and then to tabulation, and thereafter being certified as tabulated, took approximately 10 minutes.
Now, I want to ask you, were you familiar with a gentleman called Mr. Enrique Levan?
I was. I am.
And at the time, was he an employee of GCOM?
Yes, he was.
Can you tell me what was his job at GCOM?
Mr. Livan is, as I know it, a substantive assistant registration officer assigned to the East Bank registration area in District 4.
And what do assistant registration officers do?
Well, registration offices are responsible for the registration of persons. As assistant registration officer, he would be akin to the deputy in charge of such an office.
So registration for identification purposes we're talking about?
Yes, identification as well as voting once persons would have attained the age of 18 and also that they meet certain other criteria.
And for March 2020, to the best of your knowledge, was he a deputy returning officer?
No, he was not.
What role did he have in the March 2020 elections?
As I was made aware, Mr. Livan was a clerical assistant within the returning officer's office.
And when you say the returning officer's office, do you mean the office of Mr. Clement Mingo?
That's correct, for District 4.
At any time, did Mr. Livan work in your department, your IT division?
No.
Yes.
Was
sorry.
Mr. Livan a person who was eligible to be involved in the verification exercise? That's the word we've been using.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would compare that to ascertainment.
Yes.
Yes, I would say yes. Yes, being a GCOM officer. Yes.
But you gave us a specific designation
Yes.
of registration officer and
Assistant registration officer.
assistant registration.
Yes, that's his substantive position.
I understood that after the returning officer, if the returning officer was not available for the ascertainment process,
Right.
then a DRO filled in. But you said that Mr. Livan was never a DRO.
That's correct. That's correct.
And that is why I asked the question about eligibility.
I don't know that there is any particular rule. I mean, the RO is the head of that office, the returning officer's office. And the RO would have staff under his or her command that, of course, he or she will assign duties to. So whatever duty the RO bestows upon any officer under their command, I believe it's proper. The RO's responsibility is overarching as regards to ascertainment and thereafter declaration. A clerical assistant or any other lesser staff may not have that statutory authorization to declare the result of a district. But the RO or a DRO may have that.
So am I to understand from your explanation that in the ascertainment process, any employee, any clerical employee of GCOM can be involved in the process?
Well, in my view, the ascertainment is, well, as was defined, adding up votes cast for each party's lists based on SOPs. And I believe it's more administrative in nature, where once there's the RO or a DRO present to supervise that activity, then other members of staff can actually,
Be involved.
maneuver the computer and, review the statements and so forth. That is my view, considered view on the process.
Well, thank you, but let me put a more specific scenario to you.
Sure.
If in the ascertainment process, the returning officer, for whatever reason, is unavailable,
Right.
what would you say if, and let us say the process is targeting a specific area,
Sure.
what would you say if the response is, well, I have to continue the ascertainment process, I have to get a deputy returning officer from that particular area? Would that be some kind of an unnecessary stipulation?
I don't believe that that is a stipulation at all. A returning officer is responsible for a district.
Yes.
As I said earlier, for administrative purposes, District 4 is subdivided into sub-districts. We are dealing with a district-wide ascertainment.
Correct.
And therefore, any DRO assigned to that district under the command of the RO should have such powers. I don't see any reason why there should be a stipulation as to one person or the other ascertaining the results of a sub-district that would have to be part of that sub-district.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, sir, we've just spent considerable time talking about the path of the statements of polls moving from the presiding officer at the polling station right up to the chief election officer.
Correct.
And you have in fact done a flow chart identifying the path that the statements of polls take.
Yes, correct.
And if you see the flow chart that you've done, you'll be able to identify it by your initial.
Yes, I would. Yes.
Might this be shown to the witness? A document has been placed in your hand. Is that the flow chart which you have prepared to express the movement